Generation X is often described as independent, resilient, and emotionally tough. They don't complain much, they don't overshare, they handle their problems quietly. But those traits didn't appear randomly. They were built, and to understand the emotional side of Gen X, we have to look at the environment that shaped them. Because emotionally, Gen X was not raised with constant guidance. They were raised with space, and space changes people. Generation X, typically defined as those born between 1965 and 1980, grew up during one of the most socially transitional periods in modern American history. By the late 1970s and 1980s, divorce rates in the U.S. had nearly doubled compared to the 1960s. Dual-income households became increasingly common. The term latchkey kid entered the cultural vocabulary. Media exposure expanded rapidly through cable television and 24-hour news cycles. Many Gen X children came home to empty houses after school. They made their own snacks, did their homework alone, solved sibling conflicts without supervision. Psychologists call this early autonomy conditioning. When children are repeatedly required to self-regulate without adult emotional coaching, they develop strong independence. But they also internalize a subtle message: your emotions are yours to manage. There was less emphasis on emotional language in parenting culture, less discussion about anxiety, boundaries, or mental health. Emotional struggles weren't analyzed, they were endured, and endurance became identity. From a developmental psychology perspective, repeated self-soothing in childhood often produces 4 consistent adult traits. 1. High self-reliance. 2. Emotional containment. 3. Skepticism toward authority. 4. Strong tolerance for discomfort. Gen X learned early that stability could shift. Marriages ended, industries collapsed, technology changed rapidly. So emotionally, they adapted by becoming internally steady. But here's the nuance. Emotional containment is not the absence of emotion. It's the regulation of emotion without external processing. Many Gen X adults don't lack depth. They lack practice in externalizing it. When compared to millennials and Gen Z, generations raised with more emotional vocabulary and digital expression, Gen X often appears quieter. But quiet does not mean unaffected, it means self-managed. These early adaptations carried directly into adulthood. In workplace studies, Gen X consistently scores high in independence and crisis management. They are often described as pragmatic, loyal, and adaptable. They grew up analog and transitioned into digital adulthood. They experienced the shift from landlines to smartphones, from paper resumes to LinkedIn, from pensions to 401k. That instability reinforced one belief: security must be built personally. This helps explain why Gen X often values job stability over passion narratives, why they tend to avoid workplace drama, why they may hesitate to ask for help even when overwhelmed. It's not pride, it's pattern recognition. If you learned early that you are your own safety net, vulnerability feels inefficient. But emotional compression has trade-offs. Research on emotional suppression shows that while it increases short-term functioning, it can elevate long-term stress markers. When emotions are processed internally but rarely expressed externally, they don't disappear, they consolidate. This can show up as chronic stress, quiet burnout, emotional distance in relationships, difficulty articulating needs, a default response of "I've got it." Gen X adults are often the steady ones in crisis, the reliable ones in families, the calm ones at work. But being the steady one can become isolating, because strength, when consistent, becomes expectation, and expectation leaves little room for collapse. Culturally, Gen X is sometimes called the forgotten middle child, positioned between baby boomers and millennials. But psychologically, they are something more significant. They are the bridge generation. They were raised with limited emotional vocabulary, and now they are parenting children fluent in therapy language. They grew up being told to walk it off, and now they navigate conversations about boundaries and mental health days. That tension creates internal conflict. Part of them values stoicism. Part of them understands emotional openness is healthier. So many Gen X adults exist in transition, updating emotional software that was written decades ago, and that process is rarely acknowledged. Generation X is not emotionally detached. They are emotionally self-trained. They learned resilience without applause, independence without instruction, strength without spotlight. And perhaps the most human truth is this: they didn't grow up without feelings. They grew up without an audience for them. And that difference explains more than we realize.